...2015 edition of Gamelab is closing doors in a couple of hours, but before we go home, we have the pleasure to talk to Steve Gaynor. Thank you for joining us.
Absolutely. Good to talk to you.
First of all, of course, I have to ask you about Tacoma. It is just being announced. Can you give us a brief introduction on what it is and what can we expect?
Sure. So Tacoma is our next game after Gone Home, and it's another story exploration game, first-person game where, in this case, unlike Gone Home, where you're exploring one family's house to find out their story, Tacoma takes place on a space station in 2088. So it's about discovering more of the digital communications and more of the life of the crew that populate this station that is very isolated from Earth.
Okay. Aside from the obvious environment thing, what can we expect in terms of on what's really different to Gone Home? What about the atmosphere you want to get here?
Well, I think that one of the things that was important about Gone Home was the feeling of isolation, of being in this house by yourself, cut off from the outside world. And so, if anything, Tacoma is much more of that feeling. It's in this constructed environment. It's in an unfamiliar place. I think that something that was important about Gone Home was that it was a domestic setting that you could kind of identify with the house, and it is an environment where people live. And so one thing that we're trying to explore in Tacoma is what it's like for people to live their lives in this totally unfamiliar location, right? This place that has this artificial place that's been built in the middle of space, and it's about this facility that has a small crew that has to be there for a year at a time, and there's some of the they basically are there on their own, away from Earth, away from their loved ones. And the game, in a lot of ways, is about how that small group of people has to learn to rely on each other in this place that's unlike anywhere that you or I has ever been before.
How has that changed the artwork for the game, the artwork?
Well, it's something that's changed the art and so much of our process compared to Gone Home, because Gone Home was about recreating a moment in time and a specific place, and being able to say, here's a time and place we remember and that we can recreate, and that we can do research into what did this exactly look like and that exactly look like. And Tacoma is so much about imagination, right? It's about us having to create our version of the future, something that we picture this place and time could look like, but that has never existed before. So for us, it's about trying to synthesize all the influences that we can draw from, and also in media, in reality, there's the ISS is in space now, or there have been however many movies and games about the far future, but then also taking our current time and trying to extrapolate that forward and saying, who would have built this place in our timeline, and what would their aesthetic be, and what would it look like, and what would it be like to live here, and how would all of the practical technology that would keep this facility running merge with the identity that the company that created it wants to put forward. So it is much more a process of us trying to conceptualize what this place might be like and what this world could be like, compared to reaching back into the past and saying, here's what things were actually like, and let's put that on screen.
What about pushing the player out of his comfort zone, and also yourself as a creative, pushing yourself out of your comfort zone, because that's where you're sharing later here at Gamelab?
Yeah, I'm doing a talk here at Gamelab about practical ways to move past what you've already done without being just totally set adrift, with no points of reference. Because I think that it's really important to say we want to build off of what we've done in the past. We want to use that as a base, but we don't just want to do the same thing but with a couple of different little things changed, you know. And so one thing that was that we're doing with Tacoma to try to push ourselves and the players' understanding of the game in meaningful ways is, you know, the games we make are in 3D, right? They're first-person games. They're in a three-dimensional space. But when you play a game like Gone Home, like so many first-person shooters, you are, or just first-person games, you are traversing the ground plane. Like in a lot of ways, it kind of takes place in 2D. You know, you're walking through a room and looking for everything you find and then moving on to the next one. But one of the opportunities that Tacoma being a zero-gravity environment and being this space setting is that the entire game takes place in zero gravity. And so you can say, well, I've explored this plane, but I need to actually think of this environment as a fully three-dimensional space and how, if I could navigate it not just this way, but along all axes, how I could engage with more of what's here and be able to discover everything I can about this place. So, you know, challenging ourselves as designers to have to think of space differently, and then giving the player the tools to engage with that space in like a fully three-dimensional way. That's one of the ways, you know, that we're trying to get outside of what we've done before in a meaningful way. You know, that's beyond just saying, well, it's the same game but it takes place somewhere else, or it's the same game but it has different characters in it, or whatever. You know.
So an important aspect of Gone Home narrative and storytelling was collecting notes. Is that something we can expect to see here, or what can you tell us about the storytelling in Tacoma?
Well, in Tacoma, a lot more of the game is about the digital aspect of communication. You know what I mean? Like, Gone Home really took place in the time that it did so that everything would be physical, so it would all be analog, so you weren't finding, you know, emails or text messages or whatever. And so on the opposite side of that, Tacoma takes place in this very high-tech constructed environment, and so a lot of the game actually ends up about following the real-time kind of digital communications between the crew. And in the trailer that we put out most recently, there are a few images of these kind of projections, these recordings of the crew and where they were and how they moved through the station. And so a big part of it is saying it's not just about finding physical artifacts and hearing, you know, the diary of one character, but it's more about seeing the digital reverberations of what these people's lives were like, and being able to, on some level, share the space more with them as you see these moments in their lives.
Now that you mentioned the trailer, what's with the sign language?
Well, for us, it was really, you know, speaking of kind of having to imagine what this place is like and what the technology is like, we are using a basis of the idea of augmented reality, of kind of these digital projections in the environment as a central part of how the crew understood living in this place. And when you're talking about people needing to enter text or to, you know, send messages to each other or to sign into things or whatever, but the interface is completely non-literal. You know, it's not physical. A question becomes, okay, so how do you interact with that? Is there like a digital keyboard you're pretending to type on, or, you know, or is it all speech recognition or whatever? And we realized that one thing that a computer could interpret clearly would be if the user was using sign language, you could enter text that way without having to touch anything, and also without having to talk out loud, because, you know, talking is slower than typing, and you don't always want to be, for instance, you're entering a password, you don't just want to say it where somebody could hear it, right? And so, you know, our animator, Noel Clark, did a lot of research into how sign language works and how the character might actually do the motions. Yeah, it's been interesting. We've seen a lot of really enthusiastic response to that detail from the trailer. I think a lot of people were... it's one of those ideas that I think when we hit on it, it was like, oh yeah, that makes sense. And so I think a lot of people, when they see it, they're like, oh yeah, that actually, yeah, I could see that, you know? So it's been cool to see that people totally kind of got what we were going for there and are excited about it.
Absolutely. Which is the status of the development process right now? And do you have a kind of a launch window for it?
It's going to be in 2016. You know, we're aiming for the first half of the year-ish, but that's a ways off, so things could change.
But about the status, what can you share? What's left to do, for example?
In development? We have to build a whole lot more of the game. I mean, we always we build our games in order, you know. So with Gone Home, we built the first part of the game, and we kind of polished it to maybe like a beta level of finish, and we sent it out to people and got their playtest feedback and all that kind of stuff, and put it in. You know, it was in the IGF Independent Games Festival at GDC and everything, and after we got that part in, and kind of did a lot of problem solving within that, we could say, okay, so we know that's kind of a representative piece of the game. Now we just need to build the rest of it. so that's where we're at now, and it's a bit more of a ambitious scope for the game. So the timeline is a little longer than Gone Home's was, but hopefully not by too much.
Gone Home was more like a personal exploration of the inside, and this is of course outside, a space, and you're exploring the experiences of other people. Is this like you're getting outside yourself as well, and you're studying their culture or their what happened, and not these kind of more personal experiences, or is there something to it as well?
Well, I think that something that is kind of inherent to making something that's more speculative fiction, you know, that's like a future setting, is that part of the experience will be kind of inferring what the larger game world is, you know, like you were saying, what the culture of the people involved is, what the kind of context of their life is, as far as, you know, what has happened in this fictional timeline, what is the world like, because in a game that's set in the real world in the past, you kind of already know the surrounding historical moments and politics and everything. And so part of the experience of a game set in the future is discovering what all of those bigger issues are within the fiction. But that said, our biggest focus, I think, is on the individuals and is on the characters and what their personal experience is. I think that our biggest interest is saying, you know, these people are in a very kind of foreign setting, something that isn't familiar to our everyday lives, but there's still people that are going to have the same kinds of concerns and needs and desires and interests that anyone would, right? I think that people keep being people even if you put them in the most unfamiliar situations. And so I hope that what people will get the most out of is discovering who these individuals are and how who they are as people influences how they're going to react to being in the situation that they're on Lunar Transfer Station Tacoma.
And what about the platforms? Which platforms can we expect Tacoma to be on in 2016?
Tacoma is going to be on PC, Mac, Linux, and it's also going to launch on Xbox One when it comes out.
Okay, that's it. Thank you very much for your time, Steve.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me. Good to talk to you.